With the strongest and deepest tight end group this decade, will you rely on the aging superstars or put your faith in some young blood? Today, I'll take you through my redraft tight end rankings on the Fantasy First Down. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Today we're talking tight ends as I go through all of my new redraft rankings as we enter training camps in the NFL. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe, and also go and check out those other videos after you finish with this one as well. You can check us out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down and on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. I answer all of your questions on both of those, so feel free to DM me. You can also check out my full rankings, all types, redraft, dynasty, rookie, all at ffdfantasyfootball.com. Plus, I write a heap of articles over at football.rasball.com. But today we're talking tight ends, and this is a really interesting one. It's been a really weak tight end class for a couple of years, but things are getting a lot stronger. We saw Sam Laporta break out last year and become the number one. Will he be number one in my rankings? Well, let's find out. So I've gone with Travis Kelce number one, and this is not just because I'm a Travis Kelce homer. I am a Travis Kelce homer, but that's not why he's number one for me. It's that consistency and the safety of knowing what to expect. Last year, Laporta really benefited from a lot of touchdowns, and Kelce didn't get enough. Realistically, I think that's probably going to regress a little bit, and I'm still going to lean Kelce. We saw him look very good in the playoffs, and we know he still has that in him. He's just a slightly safer option for me. I know that drop-off is always a risk, and for me, he's quite close to Laporta. I certainly wouldn't be taking him towards the end of the first round like we have been in the past years. I think depending on your settings, you're probably taking him third, fourth round even, but he's certainly still a very tempting option to get onto your team. If you're not sure when to take these tight ends, by the way, as always, make sure you hit me up for my personalized rankings where I will rank players based purely on your league settings, and you'll know exactly when to take every single position because I'll let you know. Now, just behind Kelce, Sam Laporta, number one in his rookie season, which is a new one in the tight end position, and fantastic because he was very good for the Lions. I liked him a lot coming out of college, admittedly. I also like Dalton Kincaid a lot, so I was kind of hedging my bets a little bit there. But Laporta was a guy I was very big on. It was a great tight end class last year. I'm disappointed Michael Mayer didn't do better, but Laporta was very impressive. He was the clear number two option in the passing game, and I think he probably remains that way. I know Jamison Williams is like kind of primed for a breakout, and a lot of people think really highly of him, but I still think Laporta is the main big man because they don't really have anyone else in that mold, and they definitely need him, and they're going to rely on him. We've seen the tight end play a very important position at times in this Lions offense, and it was certainly the case last year. I expect that will filter into this year as well. Do expect a little bit of touchdown regression, especially if they keep using the running backs around the red zone, but I do still think Laporta's a guy you're going to happily take, and you won't regret having him on your fantasy team as long as he stays healthy. Mark Andrews slides in at number 3 for me, and I struggled with this one a little bit. He was disappointing last season, primarily due to injury. They did pass the ball a lot more. They had more wide receivers in there, but ultimately, Andrews is still a top 2 receiving option in this offense. Being a top 2 receiving option from Lamar Jackson isn't the same as being a top 2 receiving option from, say, Patrick Mahomes, for example. I'm looking at you, Travis Kelce. But it is still very useful and makes Mark Andrews very productive for fantasy. Should you take him 3 overall among tight ends? I think so. I still think that upside's there. We've seen when he stayed healthy, he's been very consistently good. We've seen them trying to pass the ball a little bit more in Baltimore. They haven't really brought in any true extra pass catching options. They brought Devontae Walker in. I mean, he's going to be okay. He'll kind of mix in a little bit with Nelson Aguilar, and you'll also have Rashad Bateman in there as probably the wide receiver too. But none of those guys are real possession receivers. It's going to be Zay Flowers. It's going to be Mark Andrews and a whole lot of running. And I do think that makes Andrews very valuable, especially in the red zone. And if the defense takes a step back, we may also find that they're not able to run the ball late in games as much as they want to, and that will mean a little bit of more receiving work for Andrews as well. There have been some people saying they think that Isaiah Likely is going to start taking over some of these touches. I don't see that at all. Mark Andrews is a considerably better player. He's right in his prime. I think this is the kind of area where you could find that you get a real bargain if he starts to fall in drafts. Now, Kyle Pitts is a surprise at number 4. I know a lot of you are expecting Trey McBride, and he's a little bit lower down my rankings, and I'll explain why when I get there. But Kyle Pitts realistically goes back into the situation that made it a top 5 tight end in his first season. He finally gets a quarterback who's likely to try to be a little bit more aggressive, fit it into tighter windows, be a little bit more positive in the passing game. In fact, realistically, Kirk Cousins is probably the best quarterback that he's had because Matt Ryan was a little bit washed in that rookie season as well. So I do like the idea of taking Kyle Pitts. You can probably get him a little bit later than a lot of these other guys. So I just wait to see who falls out of this tier. And it's probably going to be Pitts. And then you get some real value because a lot of people are going to want to reach for someone like a Kincaid and someone like a McBride. Pitts is the guy I would much rather have. We know how good he can be. He's extremely talented. He's arguably the most talented tight end outside prime Travis Kelce, of course, in the league at the moment. And I do think that if they use him properly and this offense really takes a step forward, and I think it probably will, then Pitts could be a massive bargain and could easily finish as the top tight end overall. I know we're projecting a bit, and we've done that the last couple of years and been disappointed, let's put it that way. But Arthur Smith's gone. We're going into a situation where we might get some proper play calling for a change. I really like Kyle Pitts as my number 4. And hey, if you took him up in the direction of Mark Andrews, I wouldn't argue with you either. I do think he has the potential to be that good. George Kittle sits in at number 5, and I feel uncomfortable with this. He struggled to stay healthy, even in those seasons where he played most of the games. He was still a little bit dinged up at times, but he's been a top 5 tight end the last couple of seasons. In fact, he's been a top 5 tight end 4 of the last 5 seasons, even when he's not been playing all of the games. He's very productive when he's on the field. They're a very high-scoring offense. They have 4 very good weapons: Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle. Realistically, most of the time, one of them gets injured. And that really leads to a lot of production for the other guys. And that's kind of what you're hoping for. You're hoping for this to kind of become a 3-pronged offense. And when that happens, Kittle becomes very productive. I do think regardless, he's in his prime and he's still going to have a good season. A lot of people are thinking of him as someone who's going to fall off. 30 is not that old for tight end. I do think that he's still in a very good position to succeed. That's a better offense. I like him better than some names you're expecting to see already. And here's Trey McBride. Now, I like Trey McBride coming out of college a lot, and it was very disappointing when Zach Ertz got a lot more touches than we all hoped for. McBride started to break out towards the end of last season, but he was the only option. They had Hollywood Brown, but he wasn't even playing for a lot of the end of last season. They were essentially going with just a whole heap of guys as their wide receiver. They now have a true wide receiver room. They've got Marvin Harrison Jr. They've still got Wilson. They've brought in Zay Jones, who's going to be good. I think realistically, we see, even though Kyler Murray is healthier and should hopefully stay healthy through a season and take a step forward, I do think that Trey McBride falls down the pecking order quite a bit. At best, he's the number 2 option, fighting it out with Michael Wilson and Zay Jones. But there's a lot more guys there who are going to want targets. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is elite, and he is going to get a lot of touches. The run game isn't going anywhere. James Conner is arguably their best weapon. They're going to get Trey Benson involved as well. That's a lot of mouths to feed in an offense that isn't going to be top-notch. They're kind of going to be a mid-range offense. You're just hoping that they have to chase games and pass the ball a lot. But we saw McBride didn't do a lot with a massive amount of targets last season. I do think with less targets, he's going to struggle. That's why he drops down for me compared to the guys that have more accessible upside, in my opinion. David Njoku had a fantastic finish last season. Over the last few weeks of last season, he was the number 1 tight end. And that's not going to continue, but he is still going to be very good. We've seen that having Amari Cooper's there has really helped him. I think Jerry Jeudy arriving is going to hurt a little bit. He's going to take some targets, but realistically, it's Amari Cooper, it's David Njoku, and it's the run game. And if they can get Deshaun Watson playing like he was, 5 years ago or something like that, all of a sudden you've got a really good offense. They were in the playoffs last season with Joe Flacco. If Deshaun Watson can play like Deshaun Watson can play, we could see David Njoku be excellent again. He's going very late. You'll often get him outside the top 10. I do think that he's a guy that you should be looking for, especially if he falls in drafts, because the value and the upside is so high. Evan Ingram's had a couple of great seasons, 2 top 5 seasons in a row. It's getting a surprising amount of volume given they have a lot of good pass-catching options. It's weird that this offense was kind of average and Trevor Lawrence wasn't that great, even though they had the number 2 overall running back. They have a top 4 tight end, and they have good wide receivers. Christian Kirk's great wide receiver. Obviously, they had Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones last season. Now that goes over to Brian Thomas Jr., who I do think is going to be good as well. I mean, this offense should be a lot better than it is, and Trevor Lawrence should be a lot more productive than he is as well. I do think that Ingram's gotten by on volume a lot more so than getting touchdowns. I'd love to say touchdown regression's coming, but that's just not really his game and not the way this team plays either. I do think that he relies on volume, and I'm not convinced that volume's going to remain there this season. Having said that, Ridley gone, Thomas coming in. If Thomas isn't as good as we expect him to be, then Ingram could be very busy. And we've seen that Christian Kirk struggled to stay healthy. So there are a lot of reasons why Ingram could still be good. That's why I'm willing to take him this high. But there's probably more upside with some other guys that don't need other things to fall their way for them to be good. Dalton Kincaid is going to go a lot higher than this. There's no way I'm going to get him. I was high on him last season. I had him in a lot of leagues last season. Loved Dalton Kincaid. But Dawson Knox is back. And we saw that when Dawson Knox played, Dalton Kincaid was hurt badly. He didn't get anywhere as near as many snaps. He didn't get anywhere near as many targets. He just plain wasn't out on the field as much. Now, you can hope, well, maybe realistically they're going to use him as the big slot option. Maybe they don't have the top wide receivers they want, so they're going to rely on Kincaid. I don't know that we've got any evidence to believe that's the case. Keon Coleman comes in. He just replaces Stephon Diggs. They've got Khalil Shakir, who was there last time, and he's their third wide receiver. Curtis Samuel comes in as the slot guy. I think you've already got those three wide receivers playing every down. I don't think the loss of Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs really is going to help Dalton Kincaid as much as we expect. The biggest issue, Dawson Knox is still there. While he's there, you can't have Kincaid ranked higher than these clear number one tight ends on their teams. He's just not going to be out there enough. Now, you can take the risk, and the upside is definitely higher than a lot of the guys I've mentioned earlier. But realistically, you're not winning your league with your tight end unless they're absolutely elite. And I don't know that that's going to be Dalton Kincaid this season, so I can't take him any higher than this. And that means I'm probably not going to get him, and I recommend that you probably shouldn't either. Jake Ferguson slides at number 10. I really battled with this one. He was good last season. Not spectacular, but good. The best thing I like about this is that Dak Prescott is good and this offense is good. The run game could struggle a little bit, and CeeDee Lamb's the real only good pass catcher. Now, to be fair, Brandon Cooks has been good for a long time in the past, but he's starting to fall off. Their number threes are like Jalen Tolbert. They don't even have Michael Gallup there anymore. Ferguson has a clear role in this offense, and that's really valuable. The problem is they just don't use him as much as you might hope. He was top 10 last season. I think he'll probably be towards the edge of the top 10 this season, but the upside isn't there compared to a lot of other guys, and that's why I've got him a bit lower, even though there's not really that many other options in this offense. Man, I want to have Brock Bowers so high. You know this. He's my number 2 overall in Dynasty, but I do think that they might start him a little bit slowly. We've seen teams do this. I think it might be similar to the Dalton Kincaid situation where it's a lot more of a split than we hope for. But in this case, I just think the offense is generally going to be struggling. I think Devontae Adams is going to be a target hog like he always is. I think Jacoby Myers will be surprisingly involved. And I do think we'll see a lot more of Trey Tucker than you might prefer. The run game is going to be heavy as well. I think the offense is going to struggle. They don't have good quarterback play. I don't know. There's a lot to be scared of here. Bowers has a lot of talent, and he's certainly a mismatch weapon, but I think it might take him a little while to get started. I think towards the end of towards the end of this season, you'll definitely want Brock Bowers on your roster. And he's one of my favorite late round guys because you can get him in those mid rounds. And realistically, you know you're probably going to have another guy that you play a little bit early on. But once Bowers gets going, he could be absolutely spectacular. He's one of the best tight end prospects we've seen in a long time. He's up there with Kyle Pitts. I think as a prospect, he's probably equal to Dalton Kincaid and a little bit ahead of Sam Laporta. I know Laporta was better for fantasy last year, but as a pure pass-catching tight end prospect, he's one of the best we've seen in a long time. So expect him to be good at some stage. Will it happen straight away? I just worry about whether the blocking and the snap count is going to be there to have him out there every snap. Pat Frymouth's a little bit higher than you might expect. I was very low on Frymouth last season, and that kind of panned out, admittedly. But look at what's going on. They've brought in an actual quarterback, or 2 actual quarterbacks, in fact. And we know that Russell Wilson doesn't mind using his tight end. I do think the offense is going to function better with him. They've lost Deontay Johnson, who's an absolute target suck. So you would expect that means there's more to go around. I don't think Roman Wilson's going to come in and replace him in the same way. In fact, he might even be behind Calvin Austin. So for that reason, I think that Pat Frymouth is going to be good. We're already getting buzz that he's got great chemistry with Russell Wilson. And I do think that that's going to help him as well. But realistically, even the buzz aside, I just think he's in a good situation to succeed in what's going to be a slightly passive offense, which means you're probably going to get a lot more tight end targets than you would in a really positive, aggressive, wide receiver heavy offense. Dallas Goedert could be higher, and I think he'll probably finish higher than this. Even though he struggled to stay healthy, he's been good when he's been on the field, but he lacks upside because he's behind AJ Brown, because he's behind Devonta Smith. Now you've got Jalen Hurts doing stuff at the goal line, which is taking away a lot of touchdown opportunities. Goddard hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns for a long time. And now you've also got Saquon Barkley, who's going to get a heap of receptions that weren't really happening last year. I mean, I'm pretty nervous about Goddard. He's very talented, but for me, he's at best the third pass catching option. I think he's probably fourth behind Barkley. They're trying to improve their third wide receiver spot as well. Hurts doesn't pass as much as a lot of quarterbacks do. I mean, there's a lot to be worried about with Goddard. So for me, he's the last of the really good tight ends, but I don't think he's going to be quite as good for fantasy. And that's why I've got him behind Frymouth. You can get a lot cheaper as well. Dalton Schultz is another one that I think arguably will finish high, but it's another one of those situations where it's a good offense and they'll pass the ball a lot, but there's so many guys ahead of him. I think the run game will be better with Joe Mixon, but you've got Stephon Diggs arriving. You already got Nico Collins. You've got Tank Dell. All of those are great pass-catching wide receivers. And you just brought in Cade Stover, who's presumably going to be involved in some way as well. Plus, you've got these blocking tight ends that you want to get out there, like Tegan Kitoriano. So I'm not really sure how Schultz fits in. They've paid in enough money to make it very clear he's the number one guy, but I'm not sure that his role is enough to make him reliable for fantasy. I think his upside's a little bit capped, but his floor's very high. So if you're somebody that wants just a really safe option because you feel good about the rest of your team, I think he's a better option than someone like a Frymouth who could. I think he's probably more likely to bust, but I do think that Schultz is someone who's unlikely to be a star for you. Tyler Conklin is higher for me than he probably is for anybody else. But just think about the situation. You've got Aaron Rodgers going there. Finally, the offense might actually be good. They really struggled to move the ball and score last year. And Conklin still managed to be a top 20 tight end. He's been a top 20 tight end in the last 3 seasons with terrible players. They now don't have CJ Uzama there anymore. I do worry about Jeremy Ruckert taking over at some stage, and that's why I've got him ranked a lot lower in Dynasty. But I think for this season, especially out the gate, he's someone that could be quite productive early on, especially when Mike Williams is not fully healthy in the first couple of weeks. It might be Garrett Wilson, and then I mean, Breece Hall's obviously going to be involved, but I think that probably Tyler Conklin's a top 2 or 3 pass catching option in this offense, at least early on. There's some upside there. So I think especially in PPR, like Conklin, even in half PPR, I still think because now they're finally going to be able to score points, he could also get some touchdown regression, and that's really going to help him too. Hunter Henry has been pretty good the last couple of seasons, but we expected so much more. When he first arrived in New England, he was fantastic, but the team struggled. His role hasn't been clear. He was losing touches to different people. It's all a little bit of a mess, but realistically, they don't have a lot else. He is the veteran presence at the moment. I mean, you're going to get a little bit of Kendrick Bourne, Pop Douglas, and obviously Jalen Polk arrives as well. They've got average pass catches, but they're probably going to pass the ball a little bit with Jacoby Brissett because I mean, he's not really a rushing quarterback. They are going to use the run game a lot, but I do think that Henry could be involved enough to at least make him an okay option. When you're taking him, though, I mean, realistically, if I already had a solid starting tight end, I'm not backing him up with Henry. I think Henry's a guy I'm getting if I'm in quite a deep league and I just need somebody who can get me some points. I'd probably take Henry and someone else with a little bit more upside. So if you've got a good upside player, this is kind of your floor play that I think you can rely on. Speaking of upside, I think Luke Musgrave goes the other way. If Luke Musgrave gets the clear number 1 role, I think he could easily be a top 12 tight end. I liked him a lot last season. The injury really hurt. Tucker Kraft coming in and taking over was not ideal. That makes me quite nervous about him this season, but it does mean that you at least get him a lot cheaper. You can probably take him in the very last couple of rounds of your draft, and that means you can at least access that upside for very cheap. So for that reason, I like the idea of taking Musgrave late on with someone safe like a Conklin or a Henry and just see what happens. And it could be that he's very good because this offense could be very high scoring. And if that happens, suddenly you've got a bargain on your hands and you might benefit from all the good guys you were taking in the early rounds and were able to get your cheap tight end late on. Cole Kmet would have been so much higher if Gerald Everett hadn't arrived. And then a heap of wide receivers hadn't arrived. I just really worry about where he sits in the pecking order here. I mean, you've got Keenan Allen, who is a target suck. That didn't really come out right. Let me try that again. He sucks targets in towards himself. He's like a big vacuum cleaner for targets. You've also got, DJ Moore. You've got Rome Odunze. I I mean, there's a lot of big names there. Caleb Williams, obviously being the quarterback, isn't ideal because rookies do tend to struggle initially to get the offense going. And you got DeAndre Swift, who's going to get some targets as well. And Gerald Everett is going to take some touches away from Cole Kmet. There's a lot to be worried about. I think the upside is capped. I loved him earlier on in the preseason. I've really dropped him down now that I've seen everyone else that's arrived as well. Kate Onen is just fine, I guess. I mean, he looked good at times in the postseason, but I do think realistically, he's the kind of guy you want in best ball. He'll have those boom games where he suddenly gets like 7 for 75 with a touchdown, and that's fantastic for a tight end. But for the most part, he's going to be pretty average. He's going to give you like 3 for 30. That's not going to win you anything. So unless you're in a very deep league or you're playing best ball or you just need a desperation option because you're not sure if your tight end's going to be healthy, that's the only times I'm taking Oden. Noah Fant, I think, has a little bit more upside, actually. They were using a full committee last season, bring in some new play callers. I feel like Fant's the clear number one guy here. There's no Will Disley anymore. There's no Colby Parkinson, who was taking a lot of touches in the red zone away as well. That gives Fant a lot more upside. We've seen him be a top 10 tight end in the past. Certainly, the offense having got a lot of good wide receivers and a strong run game, and Geno Smith as the quarterback, they're all downside issues, I guess. But I do think Fant will probably finish higher than 20th overall. And for that reason, if you're needing a late tight end, I feel like he's a viable option you can take. And here's the others. You'll be surprised to see TJ Hawkinson this low. I'm projecting he probably doesn't even get back until the halfway point of the season. And even then, who knows how healthy he is? Who knows how much he's used with whoever their quarterback is at that stage, be it Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy. It's just a lot of things that make me nervous. I'll just go elsewhere. A lot of the time when you get these injured players, I like taking them, stashing them on IR and just seeing what happens. But this is just a situation where that feels like a bit of a wasted pick. Unless you can get him really late, I just don't see the point. Juwan Johnson has struggled even when they haven't had any other options there. I just don't see a point. Janu Smith goes to the Dolphins, who haven't used their tight ends a lot, but we did see Durham Smythe start to get used a little last season, and Janu Smith had some good seasons. He looked good with the Falcons last year, even though he arguably shouldn't have been there ahead of Kyle Pitts. I do think with the Dolphins, he could be a little bit productive. I think he probably has more upside than anyone else here. We know who Taysom Hill is. He's going to have some boom games, and he's going to be totally useless some weeks. He's fantastic in best ball. If you're desperate, you can take him late on and just see what happens. Chig Okonkwo, I was really high on last season. It was very disappointing. They brought in a whole heap of wide receivers. He's not someone you want. Ben Sinnott has the upside, but they've got Zach Ertz there, so he probably won't access it until late in the season, and I feel like he can probably do better. Same thing as Ertz. I mean, he'll be useful early in the season, but then he's going to fall away, so what's the point? Mike Gesicki is probably the main Bengals guy, but until we know who he clearly is, there's not really much value there. Having said that, I think Gesicki probably has more upside than a lot of the guys in this area. Colby Parkinson should start off as the Rams tight end with Tyler Higbee likely to start on the pup list, but then Higbee comes back and becomes messy, and I do think you need to be thinking later in the season. If you're in a very deep league, then sure, you can grab Parkinson, start him early on, and then make it work later on. And finally, Tucker Kraft. I mean, it is possible he's the starter over Musgrave. I don't think that's unlikely, but I also don't think it's the most likely thing to happen. And for that reason, he ranks down here, but he is someone that at least has a little bit of upside, so I'm happy to put him there. Now, one thing I should mention before we wrap up, personalized rankings. I want to help you in your leagues. A lot of you have redraft drafts coming up in the next month or so. I want to help you out. Very simple. You send me $10, email me, send me $10. I will do rankings that are perfect for your league. Got really good feedback last year. A lot of people winning their leagues. They said works and it's easy to do. So I'm happy to help you out as well. Basically, your league's got different settings to every set of rankings you're going to find on the internet. I don't know how many wide receivers are in your league. I don't know how many flex players there are. I don't know how many people are in your league. And I don't know how big your bench is, what scoring settings you have, if there's any other random stuff going on, what your preferences are. But if you tell me, I can give you rankings that are exactly right for your league. So hit me up at benwasley23@gmail.com. Happy to help you out with that stuff at all. And that's all we've got for today. If you haven't already, would love it if you could like and subscribe. We're trying to grow here. Obviously, we only started a couple of months ago. I've been doing this thing for years, finally getting on YouTube. I hope you're enjoying this content, especially all those people who've been asking me to do this for a long time. If you haven't already, check it out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. That's where I drop all my rankings first. You can also find us on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Do most of my announcements through Twitter. So if you're looking for that sort of stuff, then check that out there. Our website is ffdfantasyfootball.com. All of my rankings are up there, plus lists of all my videos I do for other sites and also all my articles. And you can find my articles at football.rasball.com. I look forward to chatting to you next time, where we'll be doing something different, but you'll have to tune in to find out what. I will chat to you then.